The humiliation Jessica Chen smoothed down her navy blazer for the third time as she hurried through the marble-floored lobby of Sterling & Co. The department store's flagship location on Fifth Avenue was a cathedral of luxury, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of hushed elegance that made even whispers sound expensive. At 28, Jessica had worked here for 3 years, and she still felt like an imposter walking through these gilded halls. The morning staff meeting was already underway when she slipped into the conference room on the 3rd floor. Richard Sterling, the store manager and heir to the Sterling fortune, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his perfectly tailored suit and slicked-back hair reflecting his privileged upbringing. Around the table sat the department, heads and senior associates, all impeccably dressed in designer clothes that cost more than Jessica's monthly rent. "Ah, Jessica," Richard's voice cut through the morning briefings like ice. "So good of you to join us. I was just discussing our upcoming client appreciation event and how important it is that we all represent the Sterling brand appropriately." Jessica felt her cheeks burn as every eye in the room turned toward her. She had chosen her outfit carefully that morning, a navy blazer from a consignment shop paired with black slacks and modest heels. Clean, professional, appropriate. But under Richard's scrutinizing gaze, she suddenly felt shabby. "You know," Richard continued, his lips curling into a cruel smile, "our clients expect a certain standard when they shop with us. They want to see success, sophistication, aspiration. They don't want to be served by someone who looks like she shops at—" He paused dramatically, letting his eyes travel up and down Jessica's outfit. "Well, let's call it discount rack chic." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled around the table. Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her notebook, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago not to show weakness in front of people like Richard Sterling. "I understand the dress code requirements, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation coursing through her veins. "Do you?" Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Because honestly, Jessica, when I see you walking around the floor, I wonder what our clients must think. Here they are, spending thousands on a handbag, and they're being assisted by someone who obviously shops at thrift stores. It's not exactly inspiring confidence in our brand, is it?" The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica could feel the pity radiating from some of her colleagues, while others looked away uncomfortably. Margaret from Cosmetics stared at her hands, clearly embarrassed for Jessica. Tom from Menswear shifted in his seat, his jaw tight with suppressed anger at Richard's cruelty. But Jessica said nothing. She had bills to pay, a studio apartment in Queens that barely fit her furniture, and dreams that required steady employment. She couldn't afford to lose this job, no matter how much Richard Sterling's words cut into her pride. "I expect better presentation from all of you," Richard concluded, his gaze still fixed on Jessica. "Our customers deserve staff who embody the Sterling lifestyle. Perhaps some of you should consider investing in your appearances. After all, you can't expect to sell luxury if you don't understand it yourself." As the meeting disbanded, Jessica remained seated, waiting for the room to clear. The shame burned in her chest like acid, but beneath it, something else was growing, something cold and determined. Richard Sterling thought he knew her, thought she was just another struggling retail worker who couldn't afford to shop where she worked. He had no idea how wrong he was. That evening, Jessica would sit in her small apartment, surrounded by financial statements, investment portfolios, and business plans she had been working on for months. She would think about Richard's words, about the laughter in that conference room, about the assumption that she was powerless, and she would smile, because Richard Sterling was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you underestimate. The hidden truth Marcus Rodriguez found Jessica sitting on the steps outside Sterling & Co.'s employee entrance. her head buried in her hands as the evening crowds of Manhattan rushed past. The setting sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings, and the autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. "Jess?" Marcus approached cautiously, his briefcase still in hand from his own long day at Goldman Sachs. "What are you doing out here? I thought we were meeting at the coffee shop." Jessica looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "I needed air," she said simply, standing to brush off her skirt. "That place feels like a prison sometimes." They walked in comfortable silence to their usual spot, a small cafe tucked between two towering office buildings. Marcus had been Jessica's study partner at NYU, where they'd both earned their business degrees. While he'd landed a coveted position as a financial analyst, Jessica had struggled to find her footing in the corporate world, eventually settling for retail work to pay the bills. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said, as they settled into a corner. A booth, two steaming cups of coffee between them. Jessica recounted the morning's humiliation, her voice growing steadier with each word. Marcus's jaw tightened as she described Richard's public mockery, his hands clenching around his coffee cup. "That pretentious bastard," Marcus muttered. "Jess, you can't let him treat you like that. File a complaint with HR, or better yet, find another job. With your skills, you could be working anywhere." Jessica smiled, a mysterious expression that Marcus had learned to recognize over the years. It was the same look she'd worn in college before acing an exam everyone thought was impossible, or when she'd solved a case study that had stumped their entire study group. "Actually, Marcus, I have a confession to make." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through several apps before turning the screen toward him. "I haven't exactly been struggling as much as everyone thinks." Marcus's eyes widened as he stared at the portfolio balance on her screen. "Jessica, this can't be real. This says you have almost $2 million in investments." 2.3, actually, she said calmly, taking a sip of her coffee. "Remember how I always loved playing the stock market simulation games in Professor Chen's class? Well, I never stopped playing. I've been investing every spare dollar for the past 5 years, living on rice and beans, shopping at thrift stores, walking instead of taking the subway. Every insult about my clothes, every assumption about my financial situation just motivated me to save and invest more." Marcus leaned back in his chair, stunned. "But why are you still working retail? Why put yourself through Sterling's abuse when you have this kind of money?" Jessica's smile turned predatory. "Because I've been studying Sterling & Co. for months, Marcus. Their financial reports, their debt structure, their cash flow problems. That company's bleeding money. Richard Sterling inherited a sinking ship, and his arrogance is just making it sink faster." She pulled out a tablet, showing Marcus spreadsheets, filled with financial data, market analyses, and projections. They're leveraged to the hilt, their profit margins are shrinking, and their customer base is aging out. Richard thinks he's untouchable because of his family name, but the numbers don't lie. "Jess, what are you planning?" "I'm going to buy his company," she said matter-of-factly. "Sterling & Co. is worth about $15 million on paper, but with their debt and declining performance, I could probably acquire a controlling interest for much less. I've already identified several potential investors who might be interested in joining me." Marcus stared at his friend, as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet retail worker who endured daily humiliation was actually a financial strategist, plotting the acquisition of her tormentor's family business. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. Richard Sterling thinks I'm beneath him because I shop at thrift stores and can't afford designer clothes. He has no idea that while he's been coasting on his family's reputation, I've been building something real, something that's going to change both our lives forever." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "What do you need from me?" "Help me run the numbers, verify my analysis, and introduce me to some of your contacts in investment banking. It's time Richard Sterling learned that the woman he's been humiliating is about to become his boss. The secret weapon Diana Park was tending to her herb garden on the fire escape outside her Lower East Side apartment when she heard the familiar sound of Jessica's footsteps on the metal stairs. It was past 9 in the evening, and most of their neighbors were settling in for the night, but Diana had learned that Jessica's best thinking happened under the cover of darkness. "Rough day at the Palace of Capitalism?" Diana asked without looking up from her basil plants. As a corporate lawyer who specialized in mergers and acquisitions, she'd heard plenty of Jessica's stories about Sterling and Co. over the past year of being neighbors. "Actually, I think it might have been the best day of my life," Jessica replied, settling onto the fire escape beside her. "Diana, I need your legal expertise. Hypothetically speaking, what would it take to acquire a struggling retail company?" Diana's hands stilled on her watering can. She turned to study Jessica's face in the dim light filtering from the apartment windows. "Hypothetically? Or are we talking about something more concrete?" Jessica pulled out her tablet, the screen illuminating both their faces, as she showed Diana the financial analysis she'd been working on. Sterling and Co. is hemorrhaging money. Their quarterly reports show declining sales, increasing debt, and cash flow problems that are getting worse every month. Richard Sterling is so focused on maintaining the illusion of success that he's ignoring the fundamentals. Diana scrolled through the data, her lawyer's mind immediately grasping the implications. "This is incredibly thorough, Jess. Where did you get access to all this financial information?" "Public filings, industry reports, and careful observation. I've been watching their operations from the inside for 3 years. I know exactly where they're vulnerable." Jessica's voice carried a cold determination that Diana had never heard before. "The question is, legally, how do I make my move?" Diana set down her watering can and gave Jessica her full attention. "First, we need to understand their ownership structure. Sterling and Coaches is privately held, which means the shares aren't traded. Publicly, Richard Sterling owns 60%, with the remainder split between silent investors and family trust funds. So I can't just buy stock on the open market." "Exactly. But if they're as financially distressed as your analysis suggests, those minority shareholders might be willing to sell. If you could acquire 35 to 40% of the company, you'd have enough leverage to force major changes or push for a complete buyout." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibility. "What about their debt situation? Could that be used as leverage?" Diana smiled, recognizing the sharp legal mind behind Jessica's question. "Now you're thinking like a lawyer. If Sterling and Co. is in default on any of their loans or lease agreements, that creates opportunities. Debt holders sometimes prefer to negotiate with a new owner who can actually pay, rather than pursue lengthy bankruptcy proceedings." Over the next 2 hours, Diana helped Jessica map out a comprehensive acquisition strategy. They identified the key legal requirements, due diligence procedures, regulatory filings, negotiation protocols, and the complex web of contracts that would need to be reviewed and potentially renegotiated. "There's something else you should know," Diana said as they wrapped up their planning session. "I've been following Sterling and Co.'s legal troubles through industry contacts. They're facing 3 separate lawsuits from suppliers over unpaid invoices, and their primary lender is threatening to call in their line of credit." Jessica's smile was sharp as a blade. "How long do they have?" "Maybe 6 months before they're forced into bankruptcy or a fire sale. But here's the interesting part. If someone were to approach them with a legitimate acquisition offer in the next few weeks, before their situation becomes public knowledge, they might be desperate enough to accept terms that heavily favor the buyer. "Diana, if I asked you to represent me in this acquisition, would you do it?" Diana studied her neighbor's face, seeing the steel beneath the surface that retail customers never witnessed. Jessica Chen wasn't just planning revenge against her abusive boss. She was orchestrating a complete corporate takeover with the precision of a seasoned business executive. Jessica, I've spent my career helping corporations acquire smaller companies and watching executives destroy businesses through arrogance and incompetence. The idea of helping someone like you, someone who actually understands the business from the ground up, take control from someone like Richard Sterling. Diana's grin was predatory. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As they shook hands, on the fire escape, with the lights of Manhattan twinkling below them, both women knew they were embarking on something that would change their lives forever. Richard Sterling had no idea that his favorite target for humiliation was about to become his worst nightmare. Part 4. The power play. Vincent Hayes adjusted his Hermes tie as he reviewed the acquisition proposal one more time. His corner office, on the 40th floor of Meridian Capital, providing a commanding view of Central Park. At 55, he had orchestrated more hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts than most investment bankers saw in their entire careers. But this proposal was unlike anything that had crossed his mahogany desk. The woman sitting across from him looked nothing like his typical clients. Jessica Chen wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, her entire outfit probably costing less than his lunch. Yet the business plan she had presented was more sophisticated than proposals he'd seen from Harvard MBAs and Fortune 500 executives. "Miss Chen," Vincent said, setting down the document. "I have to admit, when Diana Park called to arrange this meeting, I expected something far more amateur." Jessica maintained steady eye contact, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "And now I'm wondering why someone with your analytical skills and financial acumen is working retail instead of running a hedge fund." Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with new interest. "This analysis of Sterling & Cobra's vulnerabilities is exceptional. Your projections for post-acquisition growth are conservative but realistic. The operational improvements you've outlined show intimate knowledge of their business model. I've had 3 years to study them from the inside," Jessica replied. "I know every inefficiency, every missed opportunity, every weakness in their supply chain and customer service protocols." Vincent nodded, impressed despite himself. "The challenge, Miss Chen, is that even distressed acquisitions require significant capital. Your personal investment portfolio is impressive for someone your age, but acquiring Sterling & Co. will require at least $12 to $15 million. Which is why I need a partner who can arrange the additional financing." "Partners expect returns," Vincent said carefully. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jessica opened her briefcase and withdrew a second document. "I'm proposing a leveraged buyout structure. I'll contribute $3 million of my own capital for a controlling interest. Meridian Capital arranges the remaining financing through a combination of bank loans secured by Sterling's assets and private equity investment." Vincent reviewed her financial projections, his eyebrows rising as he absorbed the numbers. "You're projecting a 40% increase in profitability within 18 months. Conservative estimate. Richard Sterling has been running that company into the ground through a combination of arrogance and incompetence. The customer base is loyal to the brand, not to him. The location is prime real estate. The problems are entirely management-related. And you believe you can fix those problems?" Jessica's smile was cold and confident. "Mr. Hayes, I've been watching Richard Sterling make the same mistakes over and over again for 3 years. He treats employees like disposable resources, ignores customer feedback, and makes purchasing decisions based on his personal preferences rather than market research. I could improve their operations dramatically just by implementing basic business practices. Vincent was quiet for several minutes, running calculations in his head. Sterling and Cohen's was indeed vulnerable. Their debt-to-equity ratio was unsustainable, their cash flow was negative, and their market position was eroding monthly. But with proper management and strategic restructuring, the company could be highly profitable. And there's one more thing, Miss Chen. Hostile takeovers can be unpleasant. Richard Sterling won't simply hand over his family's company without a fight. Are you prepared for the personal cost of this battle? Jessica's expression hardened, and, for a moment, Vincent glimpsed the steel beneath her quiet exterior. Mr. Hayes, Richard Sterling has spent 3 years publicly humiliating me, mocking my appearance, my background, my financial situation. He's turned staff meetings into opportunities to belittle me in front of my colleagues. He believes I'm powerless because I shop at thrift stores and live in a studio apartment. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. What he doesn't understand is that every insult, every condescending comment, every moment of humiliation has been fuel for this fire. I'm not just prepared for this battle, I've been planning for it every single day. The sweet Victory Emma Thompson had been Sterling & Co.'s head of human resources for 15 years, and she had never seen anything quite like the scene unfolding in the executive boardroom. At 62, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind, designer glasses, she had witnessed countless corporate dramas, but this morning's emergency board meeting promised to be extraordinary. Richard Sterling sat at the head of the conference table, his usual arrogance replaced by barely contained panic. The past month had been brutal for him. Mysterious investors had been buying up shares from minority stakeholders, creditors were demanding immediate payment, and rumors of a hostile takeover had begun circulating through Manhattan's financial district. This is preposterous, Richard was saying to the assembled board members, his voice tight with strain. Sterling & Co. has been in my family for 3 generations. We've weathered economic downturns, changing retail landscapes, and countless challenges. We're not going to be destroyed by some corporate raider with deep pockets. Emma watched the faces around the table, the nervous energy of board members who had seen their investments' value plummet, the tense posture of the company's financial advisors, the careful neutrality of the lawyers present. Everyone knew the company was in crisis, but no one had expected today's revelation. The boardroom doors opened and Diana Park entered, followed by Vincent Hayes and 2 other men in expensive suits. Behind them walked a woman Emma recognized immediately, though she hardly looked like the quiet retail associate who had endured years of Richard's abuse. Jessica Chen wore a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized her professional bearing, her hair styled in a sleek bob, her makeup subtle but perfect. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in corporate boardrooms, not selling handbags on the retail floor. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent Hayes announced, I'd like to introduce you to the new majority owner of Sterling & Co. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard's face went through several color changes, from confusion to recognition to absolute horror, as he realized who was standing before him. Jessica, he whispered, his voice cracking. What is this? Jessica took her seat at the opposite end of the table from Richard, her movements deliberate and controlled. Good morning, Richard. Board members, thank you for gathering on such short notice. I know this transition comes as a surprise to many of you. This is impossible. Richard sputtered. She works on the sales floor. She shops at thrift stores. She can barely afford her rent. Jessica's smile was serene and terrifying. Actually, Richard, I've been able to afford quite a bit more than you realized. While you were busy mocking my clothes and questioning my financial situation, I was building an investment portfolio worth over $3 million. While you were assuming I was powerless, I was studying this company's vulnerabilities and planning its acquisition. Emma watched, fascinated, as Jessica opened a leather portfolio and began distributing documents to the board members. As of this morning, I control 51% of Sterling & Co's shares, acquired through a combination of direct purchase from existing shareholders and a leveraged buyout financed by Meridian Capital. Richard's face had gone pale. You can't do this. This company is my life. It's my family's legacy. A legacy you've been systematically destroying through poor management, outdated business practices, and a fundamental misunderstanding of both. Your employees and your customers, Jessica replied calmly. Your debt-to-equity ratio is unsustainable. Your customer satisfaction scores have declined 30% over the past 2 years, and your employee turnover rate is the highest in the industry. She turned to address the board members directly. I'm proposing a complete restructuring of operations, beginning with new leadership and a focus on employee development rather than employee humiliation. Emma felt a surge of professional satisfaction. She had filed numerous complaints about Richard's treatment of staff, particularly his public humiliation of Jessica, but the board had always dismissed her concerns. The first change, Jessica continued, will be the implementation of a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment and discrimination. The second will be a comprehensive review of our supplier relationships and inventory management. The third will be investment in employee training and advancement opportunities. Richard slammed his hand on the table. I won't let you destroy everything my family built. Jessica's expression didn't change, but her voice carried a cold finality that made everyone in the room shiver. Richard, you destroyed it yourself. You just refused to see it happening. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your complete disconnection from the reality of running a modern retail business, those were the real threats to your family's legacy. She stood, commanding the room's attention. Every time you mocked my appearance, you revealed your own insecurity. Every time you questioned my intelligence, you demonstrated your own limitations. Every time you assumed I was powerless, you made yourself more vulnerable to this moment. Emma watched as the transformation completed itself. Jessica Chen was no longer the quiet, enduring retail worker who had suffered in silence. She was a corporate executive who had orchestrated one of the most elegant revenge acquisitions in recent business history. The board will vote on my restructuring proposal within the week, Jessica announced. Richard, you'll receive a generous severance package, but your employment with Sterling & Co. is terminated effective immediately. As Richard Sterling was escorted from the boardroom of his family's company by security, Emma couldn't help but smile. After 15 years of watching arrogant executives destroy good businesses and abuse dedicated employees, she was finally witnessing justice. Jessica Chen had proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates.